Good morning, good evening, and good day. Thank you for watching Attack Power Gaming. Today, I have for you a tutorial of the different ammunition types in Steel Division 2 and how not to suck with them. Let's dive right in. All right, folks, so here we are in the armory, and we're going to be checking out the different ammunition types that units in Steel Division 2 use. This is not about the different units, but about the different ammunitions you find over here that you can pick from for the unit to fire. If you guys enjoy this content, hit that like button, subscribe, and consider checking out that Patreon down below for all kinds of other cool perks. Here we go. Now, starting off basic here, we're starting with the HE shell. This is very straightforward. This is the type of shell that a unit will fire at soft targets, those being infantry, infantry emplacements, any gun with infantry on it. That's what this is going to use. Okay, the only stats here you really care about are, of course, the range, how far it'll fire, and the damage here. Okay, suppress, blast, these are nice, but they're not really that important. Accuracy, of course, is the accuracy. You're always looking at that along with the rate of fire. Damage, of course, being how much damage it does. Anything over 1 is doing okay. When you're getting 2+, that's when you're starting to actually notice every shot doing like killing off a unit of some sort. When you get up into the 5, 6s, and 7s, that's when you're chunking large chunks of infantry squads in a single shot. So that's the HE. Remember, if a unit does not have HE shells, it cannot shoot at soft targets. It just won't. It's not going to fire AP shells. It's not going to use less effective ammo. It just will not fire at soft targets. So be aware of that. If you turn off your HE shells, your unit will not fire at soft targets as well. So if you want your anti-tank gun to only shoot at tanks, or other hard targets, then turn off the HE shells and it no longer will. Continuing on to the other most common ammunition in the game, the AP shell, armor piercing. Very straightforward. This one is fired at hard targets. If a unit only has AP shells, it will only fire at hard targets. And if it does not have AP shells, it cannot shoot at hard targets. Now, that one's a little bit of a caveat. Units with HE can fire at hard targets. It just won't do very much. It will take a lot of time. But you absolutely can kill tanks and things using HE shells only. That's just something to be aware of. Oftentimes, though, the units will not automatically fire those HE shells at hard targets. They'll find some other more appropriate target to fire at. Now, anyway, AP shells, we now have penetration. You can see right there's the penetration. We also have the damage value here as well, along with the same stats down below. No difference there. One thing to note with penetration for all AP shells here, there is a drop off to the penetration. So 145 millimeters is how much penetration this gun has at point blank range, i.e. 100 meters. So when you are at maximum range, so when you're at 1750 meter range, you are not actually penetrating at 145 millimeters. You're probably penning closer to 125 or 130. I don't actually know the exact drop-off numbers. I just know that this is how the game works. That is how AP works in this game. Just understand that your penetration value is much lower at maximum range than it is when you're at much closer ranges, and you will penetrate more consistently at those closer ranges. Also note, at 8 damage, it takes 2 penetrations to kill medium tanks, which are like the main vehicle in the game. It takes 2 penetrations to kill heavy tanks because those have 12 health, and of course 8 plus 8 is still more than 12. And all light tanks that have anything under 8 health, which are light tanks and vehicles and things like that, will die in one shot. So that's important to note. Damage does matter when it comes to AP shells. Continuing on, we have the mysterious one that many people ask me about all the time, the APCR shell. Now, this is another form of AP shell. It should always have a higher penetration value than the AP shell. Okay, this is the key to APCR. The other big difference here is that it has lower damage. You notice we go from 8 to 4. This is key because now it's going to take 3 successful penetrations for the APCR shells to kill a medium tank, because a medium tank has 10 health. So it's now going to take 3 penetrations with APCR to kill it. Also, APCR generally has shorter range than the AP shells. The amount, how much shorter, is not consistent. Some guns have very big drop-offs. ZIS-3s, for example, go from 1750 on their AP to 1000 meter range. PAC 40 is much closer, as we can see. And for the Americans, the APCR is actually longer range than the AP shell, but that's the only ones who have like that weird special, not following the rules. So the other big thing with APCR is APCR has a higher crit rate than AP. In other words, critical damage. So, you know, when they get incendiary, loader wounded, crew killed, bailed out, all of those different crits that your vehicles can get, those are far more common to happen on an APCR shell than on an AP shell because of the higher critical rate. That's kind of the trade-off of having less damage. You have a better chance of getting one of those criticals and maybe single shot killing it or doing some really annoying crit that never goes away or something like that. Now, the other thing with APCR is that the damage, the penetration drop-off is higher. In other words, it's a much steeper curve of losing penetration. So at maximum range at the 1500 meters, the 190 is probably closer to 155, 160, which is still higher than AP, but is a much faster drop-off than the AP shell, which is kind of a flatter curve of dropping off its penetration. So that is how APCR works. This is a lot of times where you see people turn these off. You usually get very few of them as well. So if you have a high value target, you have to try to penetrate. You want to turn these off because it's always going to default fire these first. And you want to make sure they are not doing that on stupid targets, especially too because it does less damage. So a lot of times you'll see people make the mistake of leaving these on. And this thing, which should kill like say a light tank in one shot, takes 2 shots to kill it instead, which leaves that vehicle alive and gives the player an opportunity to get away. So that's really important. I basically always turn off APCR immediately once a AT gun deploys, and then I'll turn it on when I see a target that I actually need to use APCR on. That's why you see people turning it off all the time. It's very important. And also remember, like when you look at the stats, there we go, I can unclick. When you look at the stats and it says 190, that's for the APCR and not the AP. So most of the time, this thing's not going to be firing, you know, it's not going to be doing 190 millimeters of penetration. It's usually going to be doing the 145 millimeters that the AP shell does. Our next type of ammunition here is the heat shell. Heat shells are special because they have no damage drop off. In other words, at 1500 meters, it is the same penetration as it is at 100 meters. There is no drop off. All Panzerschrecks, bazookas, Piats, all of those have heat shells as well. There's not a lot of guns with heat shells. A lot of times your assault weapons in the support tab will have some sort of heat shell on them. And usually a heat shell has a much shorter range than an AP shell. In this case, it does not because it's on an AT gun. But you know, in the support tab, especially when you see like IG-33s or something of that nature that have heat shells, the heat shell range is significantly shorter than the HE shell range, and it's really important to understand that. Also, heat shells usually, I'm pretty sure always, have lower accuracy than the AP shells. So when you have the choice of these, if you can pen with the AP shells, you do not want to be firing heat shells because they're going to miss more often than the AP shells are. So that's really important to consider. But that's what the heat shell is. They're very good because, again, they have that maximum penetration at all ranges, which can be very good. Our next type of shell, very straightforward, smoke. I have a whole tutorial on using smoke, so go check that out if you want to go use some smoke in your games. Basically, smoke does no damage, drops, blocks line of sight, and it sits there for 30 seconds to a minute, 30 seconds in that zone, depending on the type of weapon that fired the smoke. So that's all smoke does. There's nothing special about it. Usually pretty low ammunition things. Yeah, not much else to say about that. Then we work into the air tap. We have bombs, HE bombs. They're exactly what they say they do. They drop, they do HE damage. This is how much damage they do. This is the bombs. Now, 50 kilogram bombs tend to be too small. You need at least 4 concentrated on one spot to really do significant damage. 100 kilogram bombs is a nice size bomb. Those generally do okay. 250, now you're getting into some deadly stuff. 250 kilogram bomb dropping on a weapon of some sort will usually kill it. Like any sort of like AT gun or something, it usually will kill that pretty consistently unless it's like a really high crew health one, like a Pack 43 or Krupp or a 88 or something like that. 500 kilogram on the other hand, if that drops directly on a unit, or 1,000 kilogram, if that drops directly on a unit, that will kill anything in the game. Generally speaking, as long as you're landing right on it and it's not falling back. Falling back significantly reduces the damage done by all weapons in the game. That's important to remember. Then we have some AP shells. Not a lot of units have this, but the Tank Buster unit with that little gray symbol, this one here, is they use AP shells. They work exactly the same as the tank AP shells. You have your damage, your penetration, you have your range. Also note, these have lower penetration when they're at maximum range. So when the plane first starts firing, generally you're going to see a lot of shells get bounced, and as it gets closer, you'll start seeing a lot more penetrations. That's because the penetration value is going up as the plane is flying closer to the tank. So that's something to remember, that you're not getting 140 until like the end of the run. when the plane is closest to the tank, which is oftentimes why you see a lot of bounces out of these things, and they can be quite frustrating. That's not that they're not good, but it can be frustrating. It also matters, like you can side shot tanks using this because you fly and come on the side armor, increasing the penetration much more consistently. So keep that in mind when you're using these tank busters. They are relying on their penetration value to actually kill the tank. Then we have HE rockets. They work exactly like HE bombs do. They're less accurate. You don't see a lot of people using HE rockets because they're very inconsistent. They miss a lot, and if they get any suppression on them, AA firing at them, they will miss most of the time and often not kill targets. So we don't see HE planes very commonly in competitive. It's not that they're bad. They have their advantages, but a lot of times their disadvantages outweigh their advantages. Then we have the AT rocket. Now, AT, HESAP is what they're called here. It usually says right down here, AT rocket of some sort. These can still fire at soft targets, but they are primarily designed to kill tanks. Now, the weird thing about this one is they do not have a penetration value. It doesn't matter the armor that the tank has. It's basically just applying damage to the tank every time one of the rockets hits spot on. The problem with that is for the example, you're only firing 4 rockets here and you're probably only getting maybe 2 hits a run. You're very rarely landing all 4 rockets in a single strike, which means even if you land 3 rocket hits, it's going to do 9 damage. Medium tanks have 10 health, or many tanks in the game have at least 10 health, which means it's going to take at least a second run for this thing to actually kill a tank. That's why, generally speaking, higher rocket numbers is better, especially when you're at the 132 millimeter size. If you're at a smaller size, so this is 82 millimeter, now you still need to get 5 hits. 5 of these rockets need to successfully land for this to kill it. So just remember, the nice thing about AT rockets is it doesn't matter how heavily armored the tank is. As long as these things land on target, they will do damage and they will kill the tank eventually. But they can be very tricky because once your unit gets suppressed, the rockets become very inaccurate and will often miss. Continuing on, we have the AP cluster. So you can see here, AP, it says cluster, AP, it's a little yellow symbol. They have no penetration once again. They have very low damage, but you can see we're dropping 192 of these. These drop in a nice little sheet, and these are designed for killing vehicles. They're very, very good at it too, but they have to fly directly over the target in order to drop those AP clusters. Yeah, there's not much to say about them. They're very good. They do a lot of damage. Once a unit gets suppressed, the cluster sheet gets wider, which means that less of the clusters actually land on target, which is why if your unit is suppressed, a lot of times the cluster plane will not kill a tank in one shot because the clusters are too spread out and they're not doing enough damage. AP clusters also can suppress infantry and weapon emplacements, but generally speaking, it shouldn't do any damage. If it does, it's very little, like 1 unit or something, but it is something that pro players do from time to time. Dropping an AP cluster sheet on top of infantry will immediately suppress them, but it won't do any damage to them. So a clutch little play you can do from time to time if you really need it. And then we have the HE cluster. These are actually quite rare. There's only, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 units in the game that actually use HE clusters. Basically, it works the same way, except that it's for infantry. These will not do like any damage to a tank. They'll do a lot more damage to infantry, especially infantry in buildings. Any unit that is in a building and gets hit by this, it takes a significant amount of damage. They're actually very effective in that role. Attacking units out in the open, a lot less effective. And of course, again, you're aiming for soft targets because these don't really do much of anything to hard targets. And the final type of ammunition in Steel Division 2 here is napalm. Very few units have napalm. There's only a couple of napalm planes in the game. Napalm works exactly like it does in real life. It lays down a sheet of fire that is technically supposed to continue to damage any units in that fire for the time that it is burning. Now, napalm bombs vary wildly in effectiveness in this game. There are some napalm bombs that are extremely dangerous and kill things completely and then it burns forever. And there are other ones that don't burn very long but have much wider radiuses of fire and all that kind of stuff. It's really up to you to find out which ones do the most like. So this one kind of drops in a sheet. It does a lot of damage to infantry and soft targets. It's very effective that way. And then you have other ones that have much like bigger booms. So for example, this one, it's got napalm bombs, and these, there's only 4 of them. It's not a sheet, and these burn longer and they kind of do a lot more damage and can even kill tanks and stuff sometimes. This is like a mix of an actual bomb and napalm, whereas the other one is kind of like just a sheet of flame and it doesn't really do a ton of damage to hard targets. It just harasses them. So those are the different types of ammunition in Steel Division 2. Make sure to be using the right stuff for the right targets. Doing that will significantly increase your success rate with different weapons, and you'll find that things like AT guns and such are a lot more effective when you're using the proper guns and bullets against the proper targets. You'll see that things die faster because you're not using APCR. You'll see that things pen faster because you're using APCR and heat shells and all that kind of stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and consider supporting over on Patreon. Thanks a bunch, and have a fantastic day.